Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick us off today to the School of Education Doctoral Student Colloquium Series presentation. I am Christy Kelly, and I'm going to be the faculty moderator for this afternoon. We are pleased to welcome all of our virtual attendees, including School of Education faculty, staff, and students, the university body at large, community members, and partner associations, among others. The Doctoral Student Colloquium series offers School of Education doctoral students an opportunity to share their original research and learn from their peers, faculty, and staff. Each month, one EDD and one PhD student presents their research at the colloquium, which is normally offered both on campus at Drexel University and online through Zoom. However, due to COVID, all colloquium events for this year are being held virtually through Zoom. These sessions help doctoral students to connect with each other and develop a peer community that is invaluable in supporting their journeys in the program. Each doctoral student presenter is also asked to write a research brief that relates to his or her presentation, which is then included in an edited publication titled Doctoral Student Research Briefs, published on the School of Education website. The research brief is a way to disseminate our doctoral students' research as shared in the colloquium in a concise format with relevance to education. Each presenter today will be provided 20 minutes to share their research. We will then move on to questions and answer following each presentation. Please save your questions for the end. You are welcome to type your questions in the chat area of Zoom or use your mic to ask the question. Our first presenter today is Mutuma Ichaba. He's a PhD student in the School of Education. Mutuma, if I will review his bio just briefly for you, completed his elementary schooling in Kenya, where he was born and raised. He proceeded to Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia for his bachelor's and master's degrees in education. In his undergraduate studies, he majored in computer science and accounting while proceeding to undergraduate studies in instructional technology. After graduation, he went back to Kenya, where he worked for 3 universities as a trainer, instructional designer, and learning facilitator for almost 7 years. His view on access to quality education is largely shaped by his experiences in Kenya and in the US. Kenya being a developing nation, quality education is considered by many as a fundamental input in the realization of national and personal development aspirations. Because education holds a paramount position in the advancement of society, it is a sector that demands intense and all-embracing exploration through research and proper deliberations by stakeholders. His life objective is to become a vital participant in advancing the quality of learning, not only in Kenya, but globally through technology and culturally relevant pedagogy. Today, Mutuma will be presenting his research on rediscovering the didactic identity of a Kenyan learner, a dual ethnographic approach. Mutuma, thank you so much for sharing your research and of yourself today. We look forward to your presentation, and I turn it over to you.
I think you're on mute.
All right, let me share the screen. Okay, keynote. So, okay. Thank you, Professor, for the introduction and also confirming my name. I have Joseph somewhere, but I don't use it because I think it's a vestige of colonialism. Today, I will be presenting on how to rediscover, on the efforts to rediscover the identity of Kenyan learner that was destroyed by colonialism. And I'm going to use an ethnographic approach. My name is Mutuma Ichaba, and my advisor is Dr. Chris Wright. This is my outline, but I'm not going to read through it. Just go in and try to present what is in the outline. My positionality, I was born and raised in Kenya until high school when I came to the United States to Chestnut Hill College. And when I came here, you know, this is, first of all, there was cultural shock. For example, in Kenya, we never talk about black and white people, you know. So it's provided me another perspective. You read these things, you know, in books, but until you experience them, that is when you really try to make sense of them. Then I went back to Kenya after graduating. I studied my computer science, and it was a double major, computer science and accounting, and master's in instructional technology. Then went back to Kenya, worked there in education for 3 universities, and also for government sector and also community. So in various education matters. And one of the things that you realize in Kenya, through teaching and also through my learning process there, education, is the imperialistic nature of the education system in Kenya. And one of the things is that because we adopted the British colonial system of education, it continues to pester Kenyan education, because we are taught, I'm not going to give examples here, but most of the examples, even those are used in books, textbooks, do not relate to the Kenyan learner. I knew that, but I realized that when I was a student. But coming to the United States and going back to teach, I realized that there is that need to really try to redefine, study, explore the Kenyan learner's identity. In fact, I would say not only the learner, all learning participants. The background of this study, as I've stated before, is that colonialism, because colonialism combined with Christianity, religion. They came to Africa, of course, in the pretense that they were coming to save the soul and civilize the uncivilized barbarians, African barbarians. Well, we welcomed them with some resistance. And as you know, as they normally did, they succeeded in colonizing the Kenyan people. And when they colonized us, they introduced the Western education, Europeans, but British to be specific, not every European. But this instruction was designed to produce the farm worker and people who would benefit them, because they occupied the lands, they stole the land, they would, and then they would commercially farm on them, they would find minerals. So they would train labor for the needs of the British Empire. But now the problem is that when we get independence, that system, for some reason, I don't know the reason, it was adopted. And while there was the intention to change it, it has not been changed. Perhaps one of the problem is that the nation concentrated on other things, such as economic development. So that is the background of Kenyan education. And during this, during the colonialism, you know, because of this introduction of they tried to make sure that the cultural fabric of the Kenyan tribes, we exist in tribes in Kenya. There is no tribe called Kenya. We have so many, we have 42 tribes in Kenya. So they made sure that all tribal fabrics, cultural fabrics were destroyed intentionally. So they would train people, so the fellow Africans, and then they would come and brainwash other Africans into adopting, assimilating the African people to Western education. But at the end of the day, it never fitted, because Africans, they are not Europeans, they are unique people, and that problem remains today. So decolonizing education in Kenya. Okay, we resisted the colonialism. We get our independence through blood. We now reminded ourselves the harm they had caused to our cultural fabrics and the society in general. And then we try to repair. One of the ways of repairing, of course, is trying to change the education to reflect the aspiration, the uniqueness of Kenyan natives. The problem we have, or rather this study that tries to tackle is that while the problem of lack of culturally relevant pedagogy or learning within Kenya has been rehashed, it has been written a lot and presented and discussed and debated. One of the problems, this is through literature review and also personal experience and also discussion with the fellow educators in Kenya. You realize that we need to go a step further and design and implement in an empirical way. Okay, the problem is there, but before designing now, we need to identify who is a Kenyan learner, so that when I'm designing the curricula, for example, what characteristics should this curricula hold, so that when I'm implementing it, it becomes practical, and then I assess how it changes, how it builds upon the education performance of the learner. So that's a key problem. There is a lot has been written about the problem, but now we need to go further and design and implement. But before that, we need to define who is a Kenyan learner, what makes up a Kenyan learner, what characteristics. These are some of the objectives. They may change as I continue. So this study, by the way, is partial study. It's exploratory study. It's not something that I can publish. It's something that I'm building upon, preparing myself to what I want to do. So the objectives of this study and ethnographic is to explore the pedagogical character of a Kenyan learner. And also define, after exploring, see, let's say through interviews, dialogue, and also exploration of artifacts, for example. I use that data now to define, to draw the portrait, finally, to draw the portrait, the picture. This is the picture of a Kenyan learner. Research questions. So how do we define the authentic Kenyan learner? And what some of the traits that because if you identify the characteristics of what makes the Kenyan learner, then you have to make sure that you defend it. And as we continue to see the process that I have adopted, you implement something, if it is at one state, if you leave it again, you may fall back to where you started. So after defining this characteristic of Kenyan learner, then how do you defend it? How do you maintain it? Okay, this is a literature review. Now, the literature review at this point, it may change, is integrative literature review based on what I've been pursuing. So I've been looking into the issue of identity. And the majority of the literature, rather, fall into two categories in my analysis so far. There is Western philosophy about learner identity, and Kenyan, I would say Kenyan African. I added that African for purpose of, well, even if we are talking of Kenya, it's within the African continent, sub-Saharan Africa. So even if I'm talking in Kenya, it's for the purposes of really research, study. But when it comes now talking about the Kenyan identity because of these tribes. They are spread from south to north, east to west. So the Kenyan African, so in Kenya, when we talk about Kenya, we are not talking in a vacuum. There is a lot of commonalities between Kenya and Tanzania, for example, and Kenya and Uganda. I'll give you an example. I come from a tribe called Meru. There are Merus in Uganda, there are Merus in Tanzania. And although the dialect differs, when we speak our local languages, all those people understand one another. And then another is Maasai. They cut across that continent. So, but one of the things that you notice about the literature review is that the Western philosophy, they are more specific, and then they put the individual learner at the center of discussing the identity. When you look to Kenyan African philosophy or Kenyan native philosophy on learner identity, it's not that specific. And that's one of the problems that this research tries to solve, or perhaps contribute, is becoming more specific. Because if you don't become specific, then you cannot design the curriculum. You cannot design that instruction. You cannot teach. You have to be as specific as possible. But so that is some of the differences so far. All right. This study used do ethnographic dialogue, because even if I depend on literature to try and bring out the Kenyan identity of the learner identity of Kenyan learner, it will be problematic because, first of all, the literature is not sufficient, it's not specific, so it has that weakness. So I start by talking to selected people. My plan is to dialogue and interview a professor or two, and the characteristics of the professor should have both external and internal experience, and be able and have interest in the area. Because what you realize in Kenya is it takes, because you are trained with the colonial curriculum, and there are people who would want to propagate that kind of curriculum. They think is the best thing that was brought to the continent. So you have to be specific who you talk to, because you may talk to somebody who loves the way the education is being run in Kenya. So for the moment, I'll say I must insist that this is not a complete study. It's not complete. It's an exploratory study. It's ongoing, right? So I'm using dialogue, and I started with a professor who I know has interest in culturally relevant pedagogy, on how we teach our students. And he has, through dialogue, I knew him because he used to complain that the materials that is being taught, and not only in the university level, also in primary and going down to master, does not fit. And then he has international experience. That matters because you are able to see, or rather think in a globalized way, and know that people exist in nations, tribes, and people are different. And you have, when you are teaching, you have to be as specific as possible and design something that relates to the learner. Secondly, he teaches in one of the top universities that is very international, so he is able to interact with various students from all over the world. This is a process that I adopted from Lopez. This process was designed for leadership, just so that with the caption is on my right. I don't know how I can move it. Hold on. I'm trying to. The pictures are on my right. Okay. So anyway, I'll just try. It's hidden a little bit here by the pictures. So my computer, I'm trying to move it so that I can start. How can I move this thing? My cursor. Just and then move it. Yeah, just minimize it. And then just start. Right. I can see it's for discussion. As I told you, I started with presentation of my positionality, and then so myself, I reflect on myself and my experience as a student, as a teacher, as a trainer, and also as a community participant within the Kenyan community. Critical theorizing. In the future, building on this research, I will be building on culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally relevant responsive pedagogy, and tribal critical race theory, and also indigenous knowledge systems. Okay. And then relationship with the community. Of course, this research is designed for community. And then critical dialogue, that is where I am now, critical dialoguing. Although the arrow is so going in one direction, so after critical dialoguing, then I go back and then try to relate it to the critical theories, and then build towards disrupting neoliberalism. After that's why when I stated that after creating something, let's say from this study, because I'm really dead set to implement it, it has to be defended. Because something like neoliberalism, they would want us to make our education system universal, such that so that other students from all over the world can, for example, register and make money. So you have to defend it because of, let's say, capitalism, neoliberalism in education. And then action plan. I intend to, after this PhD, after completing it, my study really is a long study, a longitudinal study, a lifetime commitment in Kenya. Practice it, advocate for it, and see whether it can work. These are partial results. They are not entirely, the professor, it's always tough to get him. He normally gives me 20 minutes because he's a busy person. Maybe we don't have so many professors in Kenya to that level as experienced. Yes, which is true. So he's being called in, he's involved in community development, informing in various committees within the government. He heads the department, as I showed you. So every time when I ask him, we meet, he gives me 20 minutes. And one of the questions we have been trying to reflect upon based on his experience through the Kenyan system and abroad, particularly in Kenya, the Kenyan system. The question is, first of all, what it means to be a Kenyan to him. And this question takes him, for example, to when in his learning process, when did he want to become something of use in the society, for example, or did he make a decision to become a professor, for example, based on inspiration from the community? But one of the intriguing part is that, but I am suspecting this because of colonialism. We really never built a nation. And that's one of the problems that has been developed as a nation, not to design the curriculum that is not imperial, that is not colonial. So he says this, for example, if we don't appreciate the tribe, the clan, then we cannot make sense of what Kenya is. Basically, what he's saying is that go to the roots, look at the tribe. How did they used to do their things? the education, because there was education systems before colonialism. There were education systems there. There were cultural norms. There were governments in these tribes. They existed before the British came. It's those that they never existed. They had their learning systems. They got destroyed. So unless you go to the roots, then even if you talk of Kenya, really, you're not talking much. And during this discussion, this is what comes out. At the center of it, there is Jamaa. Jamaa is you. And then you are surrounded, you're part of Jamii. So before even defining you, while you are the, as you can see, even the lexicon is Jamii, you are a derivative of the community. I do not want to translate this concept because when you say society or community in Americans, not in American, in the West, in English, really, unless you have lived this kind of life, you understand what is Jamaa, Jamii, and then Harambe. All right. So I did not want to translate, but if translated simply, Jamaa means a human being. And then Jamii means society or community. But in Kenya, it means something else. And really, when we are talking, you are talking from a point of emotion, point of connectedness. So Jamii is the group to which you belong per se, and you are part of it, so you are Jamaa, all right? And then there is Utu. That is the humanity. No, the question mark, I left it purposely because I have to, after Jamii, which means a clan, maybe, or sub-clan, there are those, or even a tribe, then is there really a Kenyan identity? So that is the next exploration that we are continuing. This is a partial research. I must be clear on that. It's not something that there is not a concluded study, because I need also to talk to a Generation Z, for example. How does identity to them mean to them? For example, how has technology influenced their understanding of Kenyan identity and Lana? And also a traditional teacher. They are traditional teachers, but they are not very prominent in Kenya. And talk to them also, so that I just combine with them and all these dialogues and interviews, and see if I can be able to draw the portrait of a Kenyan learner. The second question is in progress, so I'm not going to talk about it for now, but maybe the next presentation. Research implication, basically what this research has the ability to design curriculum that will produce quality education, that will not only help to educate the people, but for national development, because at the end of the day, we are talking of human beings. The people who design problems, not because they're influenced by the Western philosophy or philosophy beliefs, but they believe in themselves. And when you kill somebody's identity, like colonialism did, you are killing their aspirations. They don't understand who they are. They don't have roots. But if you understand yourself and you get trained and mentored in the ways that you best understand, then you produce leaders who feel they have the connection to the community, and at the end of the day, they are able to lead according to the natives.
Mutuma, I am so interested in hearing more, I have to say, but I think we've run out of time, and I want to be able to give at least one question for you from our participants. So I apologize, but I think there's so much more to talk about and hear about, and we look forward to seeing how your research progresses. We have 1 minute, literally. Is there anyone in the room who has a question, one question, or if you can put your questions in the chat, then Mutuma can at least have those questions to take away with him and reach out to you separately, or you can have additional guided conversations.
Hi, since nobody's speaking
Thank
up.
you. Thank you.
How you doing? I do have a couple of questions. So you did mention that there were 44 tribes in Kenya. So how are you going to account for this when you are designing and implementing the curriculum and instruction that you would like to propose? Second one is, you said this is an exploratory study of the Kenyan learner, but you talked to a Kenyan professor as opposed to a Kenyan learner. So I was just wondering, are you going to talk to the learners within Kenya, within the different, tribes? And this may be a long-term thing. And then finally, you said the person that you talked to was a professor who, was highly traveled. So do you think his travels and different educational experiences outside of the Kenyan education system is going to color his perceptions of the needs of Kenyans, since he is being influenced by the colonizers, as you stated? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mutuma, we won't have an opportunity to let you answer out loud here, but I do want to allow you to reach out to, is it Stephen Roundtree, for that conversation. And also you have one or two other questions in the chat just to take away with you as you continue to work on your project. Thank you so much for presenting today. Thank you. I'm going to now turn it over to our second presenter. We're very excited to have Dr. Anita Forrester here today. She is an EDD alumna of the School of Education. She will be presenting on her research. The title of her presentation is a Transdivisionary Approach to Global Studies Programs at Community Colleges in the U.S. Dr. Anita Forrester is a program director of Global Studies and Associate Professor of Geography and Environmental Studies at Northampton Community College, where she's taught since 2007. As a child, she lived in numerous different countries and cultures. Thanks to her parents' love of art, museums were always on the top of the agenda in each new locale. These and the environments that the places were surrounded by set her on an obvious track to focus on geography and global studies as a career. Working in the 1990s at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and watching multiple instances of genocide impact communities also made a huge impression. She moved to higher education to ensure that the next generation can avoid the same fate. At the same time, her research interest shifted as well to incorporate more environmental and climate topics, be it impact, mitigation, or the other important climate and environmental justice issues. She's earned her undergraduate degree in both political science and geography and graduate studies in geography from Hunter College and the city of New York. She has a doctorate from Drexel University, where she focused on importance of developing global studies programs in community colleges, and she's here today to share her research on that. So Anita, I will turn it over to you. Thank you very much for sharing your work today.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Kelly, for your support in my journey at Drexel. So I wanted to introduce my research topic, and that is focusing on community colleges. So exploring the nature of the field, a transdivisionary approach to global studies programs at community colleges in the US. So the things that I explored was, what is global studies and where it's taught? That was something that was very important to me because I am a community college faculty member. The global studies emerged as a new field in higher education in the United States in the 1990s. But its origins can be traced back to the fields of political science, international relations, and globalization studies. Global studies was intended to use an interdisciplinary lens to study and solve global problems. Political science, international relations, and globalization studies were and are fields firmly grounded within the divisions of humanities and social sciences, which left them somewhat unable to evaluate the science-based problems global studies originally sought to address. Through introducing scientific literacy into the mix with the physical sciences, and especially that of the often neglected earth sciences like geography, global studies could provide a new perspective free of humanities and social sciences limitations. Since its founding, there has been an increase in the number of colleges and universities that have been offering global studies programs or programs that are closely related to global studies. However, the growth has not been seen as much in community colleges. And community colleges do provide a gateway for transfer students, as a significant number of students who begin their studies in community colleges continue on their education. Not providing global studies programs at the community colleges limits the number of students in higher education who will transfer into another program. Based on my research, I found that historically speaking, global studies programs are global only to the extent that those who dominate these programs creations can use foreign languages and study abroad as the key ways to demonstrate the globality of their programs. Accordingly, global studies programs lack a central and universal framework. Internationalizing like a curriculum or a school doesn't make a program. Based on my initial explorations, I focus on the following problem statement: that global studies programs lack a cohesive set of guidelines and standards to organize around, and as a result, tend to operate independently of one another with only superficial similarities within each other or to each other. As a result, community colleges in the US interested in global studies, interested in introducing global studies, must effectively kind of reinvent the field from scratch. So the purpose of this research was to explore how global studies programs are designed and implemented at public community colleges in the US, and to define the challenges and the opportunities facing the faculty and administrators tasked with establishing these programs. And then the findings of this research are used to gain an understanding of how global studies programs are developed, how to recognize what influences a successful global studies program at a community college, so that in the future, we can create a set of guidelines and standards for global studies programs development at community colleges. And then finally, to identify the kind of support necessary for the development of global studies programs at a community college. My interest in this topic, my research was really driven by my background, my education and my experiences, my holistic way of viewing the world, and my global identity and perspectives. Being a geographer, I view the world from both the social science and physical science perspective, a holistic, interconnected, multidisciplinary view that comes from my educational background. My global identity, since I had the opportunity of growing up globally as a child of international civil servants, was really something I was immersed in. As a geographer, my field has this duality that strengthens our understanding of the world around us. And I see this element missing from global studies programs. It is more than just knowing where a place is, but how and why it got there. What is the impact on the people and what the people's impact on it have been? It's so much more important. I believe that by tapping into this interdisciplinary and transdivisionary approach to understanding global processes, global studies would be in a position to give community colleges a diverse background to better understand and change the world. So I grouped my review of the existing literature into 4 categories. I'm not going to spend too much time on the literature review. That is a huge area. But what I did was, again, looked at a few things. So I grouped them into 4 categories: global citizenship education, learning impacts of going abroad, the history of global studies, and global studies as a field. On the whole, 2 things emerged from the literature on global studies. One of them was that global studies is meant to generate global citizenship via a multidisciplinary approach. And global studies has problems resulting from a lack of mission clarity, leaving it drifting away from multidisciplinary towards humanities and social sciences. But the literature really suggests that these problems can be solved via rethinking how global education is done in a way faithful to the original theoretical discussion. Global studies can be more global by focusing on its marriage of social and physical sciences, methodologies, and perspectives. Playing up the field's multidisciplinarity is a way to do this. Much of the literature argues because even if the field becomes a subprogram, it still is allowing for a diversity of learners' approaches to global issues. So the questions that kind of guided the research and that clarified and emerged from the literature are questions as what is global studies and what differentiates it from other programs such as international studies, political science, and international relations. What relationships do the faculty and administrators have to the foundation and continued development of the program, and what the primary hurdles to global studies and global programs are. So I conducted much of my research, my data collection and interviews during the height of the pandemic. And that, of course, brought a lot of challenges that I'm sure we all face trying to do our research. For the research methodology and analysis, I adopted an embedded mixed approach to determine the shape and characteristics of global studies programs in community colleges across the US. I drew upon both qualitative and quantitative methods because the primary qualitative method significance emerges more clearly against the backdrop of the secondary quantitative methods data, which I found as I did data collection via multi-phase approach. And this kind of allowed me to consistently consider new data in light of this new information as I was collecting it. So the phase one was just a college website analysis. I analyzed 925 public, tribal, and independent community colleges in the US, looked at which programs have global studies programs or similar programs. Phase two was geocoding the addresses of each of these colleges and then categorize them by no global studies programs, some global studies program, related programs, etc. And then phase three, which ended up being eliminated from here. I'll talk about that in a second. Phase three was meant to be a survey launched among schools with global studies programs to clarify further how their programs differ from one another. And then finally, phase four was a semi-structured interview to understand the perception of faculty and administrative leaders as they developed and launched the programs. So the college website analysis was pretty straightforward. I looked at the website, I analyzed it, I checked what programs they have, what the programs required from the students as they continued along with the program. Phase two was the geographic information systems analysis. The main purpose of this two-step quantitative analysis was to get more data on the get all of the data that I got from the website analysis and then code it in using GIS. And I use for this ArcGIS as the software, and that is excellent at collecting and storing and displaying data, which is often a lot easier to see than if I just put everything into gigantic spreadsheets. So in my study, I use GIS for just basic analysis. I plugged in each school address to the ArcGIS, then geocoded them to create the maps. And this is one of the maps that I created using them. Essentially, I created a visual representation of the quantitative data that came out of the website analysis, allowing me to identify whether there are some regions that have programs, and definitely some interesting patterns emerge. And then, of course, since I mentioned I had to eliminate the survey from this process because of doing research in the height of the pandemic, I was just not getting the feedback, the background information. But it was a challenge because it took me a while to discover that my emails were just going into junk mail. My emails were not reaching the people because we were all inundated with so much email during that time. So I shifted and let go of trying to get the survey and moved on to the interviews. That was the final leg of the research. It was qualitative, semi-structured interview process that was conducted over a 3-month period. And what I did was interview participants, faculty members, and administrators who were involved in global studies program. So the defining characteristics of these participants was that they had to be a faculty member or an administrative leader responsible for overseeing global studies programs or related programs. And I invited 8 participants representing 7 schools, ranging from small to mid-sized community colleges, even some larger ones, across the contiguous United States to take part in the interviews. And I use open-ended questions to kind of pick their brains, to gain further insight into the program design, intention, and evolution process, which was really interesting. I didn't just want to get, well, why did you do this global studies program? I really wanted to get more in detail about what exactly drove them, what was behind the development of the global studies program development. The interviews were really enlightening, especially with respect to the personnel, which I divided into faculty administrators due to the thematic similarities of individuals to each other within those cohorts. So then, of course, I coded and compared and transcribed the interviews through multiple cycles. But I'm just going to jump out because I'm also mindful of the clock ticking. What I really did, because I created categories of categories and all of that, was that global studies, while ideally multidisciplinary and interdivisionary, is a field whose shape and characteristics are ultimately even their fate is very intimately bound with the goals of the individual proponents in a given place who try to create global studies programs. And that was really surprising as I looked at it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the quantitative portion of this research, because when I was conducting the analysis, again, I was using GIS, and that really brought a new element. It visually represented what I was seeing in the research. I was able to notice certain trends emerging, as you can see on the maps here. On the map on the left-hand side, you can see all of the community colleges in the US, but the second map shows you where all of the global studies programs are, and some interesting trends and clusters start to emerge. I identified a coastal Southern California, a Seattle metro region, and a DC to New York kind of Boston, in a sense, the I-95 corridor, where you have most of the global studies programs. And of course, demographically, these are also extremely changing human landscapes, which you can see when you start putting demographic data behind the location, the community colleges as well. Kind of linking back to the study abroad element that I also examined, this going global element and becoming more and more global element kind of emerge from this. So global studies, right, emerged as a discourse within this time frame of emerging going global ideas. And so did the population change and demographic change happening in exactly those areas as well. As specific areas become more and more global, the local colleges are too becoming more and more global. So while the initial look of global studies program paints a very sad picture that it is a very limited area, that there's a very limited discourse in the overall state of the field, this doesn't really convey the full story. Increasing global populations within the country correlates to a significant degree with the emergence of global studies program, but global programs are just one part of giving global perspective to students. As you can see on the map here, if we look at not just global programs, but related programs such as international studies or likewise certificate programs, which there are a lot of, we can see the situation is not as dire. There are more community colleges beginning to understand the need for new mechanisms to understand their increasingly globalized contexts. When I looked at the interviews, those were, and I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights from the interviews. There was so much rich data that it's very hard to focus on just a few. So I conducted my interviews with 8 participants from community colleges that fit the research criteria and divided the participants into 2 cohorts, the faculty and the administrators. And my initial goal was to glean what differences existed in how they approach the global studies programming and development from their separate positions. But one of the most surprising findings I had was that my division of 5 faculty and 3 administrators perfectly overlapped with another possible way of dividing them. The 5 faculty were united in having significant international experiences as children, either as immigrants the children of immigrants, or traveling significantly as children. The three administrators, by contrast, were a uniform demographic in that they were all born to American parents from multi-generational American families and had all gone abroad as adults in college or after it. Altogether, as a group, however, their engagement with global studies is self-reportedly rooted in a sentiment that one of my interviewees said, that global context is my context. So that was a really interesting finding that I had. I would love to talk to you guys so much more about the different findings in the interviews, but, and if anybody's interested, I would love to share my slides with them or talk to them about it. But I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to talk about some of the interesting recommendations that I ended up with my research. So again, bear with me for one moment while I jump ahead a couple of slides. So, sorry. So what came out of this exploration of the field? Just a reminder, my research goals were to find out what is global studies and what differentiates it from other programs, who the faculty and administrators are who develop and engage in global studies programs, and what were the primary hurdles to global studies and the primary hurdles as global studies programs as a whole face. So as a result of my findings, the following recommendations were proposed for academic organizations and groups, for community college administrators, and community college faculty, so that we can gain an understanding in how global studies programs are developed and the challenges that they face. So one of them was that we need to recognize that community colleges pose a diverse set of challenges to global studies programs, while also acknowledging the way in which the community colleges help influence the shape of a program. We particularly need to examine that successful global studies programs at community colleges are looking and look to the successes of these stories, which will help us develop the set of guidelines that we are seeking and the standards that we need to bring to global studies programs at community colleges so that they can become successful. However, no less crucially, we also need to identify the kind of support necessary for the development of global studies programs at community colleges, specifically for program faculty. Successes at one school cannot be replicated at another without proper support and infrastructure. So one of the recommendations is to really establish a global studies academic organization that focuses on community colleges. That doesn't exist right now. That could help encourage communication between faculty across different global studies programs, across different colleges, across the country, so that you don't need to recreate everything from scratch, kind of creating a research hub for community colleges. This hub would help program development, help formalize what we need to do to create a successful global studies program in the country, right? This hub, however, would, or not however, could create templates for programs, help link it to the sciences, bring it all together for all divisions, because global studies is not just a field, but it connects all of the other fields as well. For the administrators, in particular, a vital recommendation is that supporting global studies will positively impact school funding, right? And numerous studies have also found that global studies and the courses that are linked to these programs, such as study abroad, help increase student retention and graduation rates. So while development of the programs are associated with the cost, the benefits will most likely increase revenue. And these non-traditional programs require proper funding to allow faculty to develop them, but they do pay off. When it comes to further research, there are so many opportunities, but just to name a few, we need to continue and examine the regional distribution of global studies program in community colleges and all higher education institutions, actually, and what socioeconomic elements influence program development, as well as what geographic factors influence global studies development. There are shifting demographic trends that we must not forget. Some of the areas that I examined showed that 30 years ago, an area that was almost exclusively American born now had a dramatically larger contingent of immigrants. And in one particular area, a population that has grown by 54%. This trend was very common in some of the community colleges that had global studies program. As society changed around them, the college adapted to what was needed. As a population geographer, this is an especially especially exciting prospect for me to look at more demographic data, examining the demographic influences of increasing interest in global education. Along with that, the personal histories of the participants also strengthens the recommendation for further sociological exploration into who does global studies and why and where they're doing that. So finally, perhaps the most importantly, the impact of the current generation of students and their different educational needs and perspectives has really had an impact on higher education. So tracking that change in our globally connected world as it applies to the development of global studies programs and other programs will be beneficial if we want to know how to adjust to a new higher education reality. So in conclusion, if global studies programs at community colleges in the US are simply the result of the right people being there at the right time, which really was one of the things that emerged from the interviews, then global studies as a field is not sustainable. We can't rely on a few faculty with the right background who can see this interconnected world as interconnected, who can see things globally. That alone is not enough to maintain, let alone build a discipline. Nevertheless, the personal histories of global studies human actors are important because how those histories help produce the faculty and administrators as global faculty and administrators in the first place. Globally minded people are not born, but made through their experiences. So how do we recreate that for everyone, for the entire school, for all the participants in our community college education processes? So for that, we need that proper set of guidelines to help develop the program. Strong global education can create globally minded graduates who understand the total, all-encompassing scope of global captured in both the literature and the interviews. And by teaching students with this transdivisionary perspective and interconnected worldview, students of the future can develop the same advantages the participants already have and become global citizens who understand that, as I mentioned before, what one of my interviews put so well, that global context is my context. So thank you so much for listening to my research, and it was very exciting. And again, there was so much, especially interviews, that if you have any questions, I would love to talk to you guys more about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anita. And you have ended with enough time for a few questions from our participants. We may not have time to answer all the questions, but would love to be able to provide you as many kind of comments and questions and feedback as we can at this point.
This is Stephen again, since no one else is talking. I'm gonna get my question in. Dr. Forrester, that was a great presentation. Is any thoughts on, the growing movement of the International Baccalaureate program within secondary schools? Since I work in a district, we have the IB program. So I would be interested in knowing any thoughts about how maybe you can tap into that growing movement, especially in the urban school districts that are developing IB programs. So any thought on how you might be able to tap into that growing field and how maybe you can bring some of those best practices into your programs as well? Thank you.
Oh, that's a great question. And of course, I would love to hire more geographers. No. I think I definitely think that bringing this to the secondary schools, the entire K through 12 system, kind of to globalize that curriculum would be so important, kind of connecting every single field and showing how it connects out to the global and then back to the local is so great. One of my some of my top students are actually dual enrollment students, and I know how interested and connected they are to what's going on. So absolutely bringing that to the K through 12, not just having a generic social studies program.
So since I was more thinking of, you have the K through 12 programs, which are getting heavy on the IB program. So how can you bring those students from the K-12 program who have experience in the IB program into your global studies program, since they already kind of have a background in the field and kind of have a global perspective? So is there a way you can beef up the community college global studies programs by tapping into growing movement of the IB programs at the secondary level? I'm sorry.
You know, I haven't thought of that, but that's something that definitely gives me food for thought here. I guess more dual enrollment kind of elements, and the faculty from the IB programs can come and
Yes.
join. I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
opportunities for that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just a great way to connect the two, because I think a lot of times, you know, community colleges are the stepchild in this whole entire education system.
Yes. Great.
Thank you so much. Anita, you have a few questions and comments that are in the chat. I just want to make sure that you see those before we have to close today. And unfortunately, we have hit our time limit, even though I know we could have more conversation on both of our wonderful presentations today. So just to wrap up, I want to thank our presenters, Mutuma Ichaba and Dr. Anita Forrester, for presenting today. I'd like to thank all of you who have attended our colloquium event series today, as well as in the past. The next colloquium will be Friday, January 13th. Wait for it, 2023. So for those of you finishing up a semester or term, we wish you the best of luck and look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.